Hi everyone, this is Shiro from Guided Soul-ution, and on this episode of From the Heart, I wanted to talk about the extension of the blog topic that I wrote, which is the key to freedom. Freedom is definitely something that we don't always talk about in our daily conversations. It isn't something that we ask a lot of questions about in counseling or anything else. We don't actually use that word, and yet when you look at the things that you desire, oftentimes the underlying theme of what we're really seeking is freedom. When you think about money, for example, and how much we want and be wealthy and all of that, why? Because we want to be free, right? The freedom of choice, right? The availability of choice and purchasing power, right? Even when it's security, why do we want to feel secure? Because in the state of security, we feel free. When we feel unsecure, we feel bound, limited, constricted, not free. When you think about our jobs and how we want to quit jobs, or we want to be entrepreneurial and be our own boss, control our own schedule, or we don't want to be told what to do. Why? Again, because we want to be free. When you think about a relationship that we want, the ideal relationship where we can honor each other and respect each other and love each other unconditionally, why do we want that? Because in that we feel free, right? Where we can just be ourselves and not care about how we appear, not care about acceptance and approval and validation. Why? Because freedom is at stake. Even Kiki thinks so. By the way, this is not Kiki. It is the statue of Kiki, I guess. Oftentimes I get that question. Hi, Kiki. So we want freedom. And what is the key to freedom? It isn't in the things that we have. It isn't in the things that we do. It is in the mind. And when you are truly in the state of freedom, you can be in prison and still feel free. But how do we achieve that? The key to freedom is to release judgment. Now, judgment, when as a word, it's a powerful word. You know, we often see it in a more dramatic light, legal things, legal conclusions like judgment or authority figures. And when it comes from our personal, like friends and loved ones, it's devastating to be judged, right? Because what happens? The essence of judgment is that it's conclusive. It cements it. So when you judge somebody as a liar or cheater or whatever, narcissistic or mean or whatever it is, we immediately place a filter over our eyes to see that person through that filter of judgment, and it cuts off the possibility of other potentials that person may have, right? But even when we think about other things, when we look at judgment from the element of conclusivity, not to use the word judgment, we can see that judgment is actually prevalent in our minds constantly and in our daily lives. Just by saying, I suck at this, I need to be this way, I should be this way, I'm supposed to, right? Even having the definition of right and wrong, good, bad, success, failure, these are judgmental elements. So, because when we look at things from a divine perspective, from divine wisdom, there is no polarization of one being better than the other. It recognizes that there's a positive and a negative. It recognizes that there's a light and a shade. It recognizes that there's a right and a wrong. But it doesn't necessarily say one is better than the other. In other words, it's recognized that they are all part of the singularity. When you think about even the nature of the universe itself, that it's infinite. Why? How could it be infinite? Because it's constantly expanding. It's constantly evolving. And constant change and expansion and evolution can only take place in a space where there is no judgment. So judgment is a very dense and part of the ego construct, if you think about it. And when we think about what we really want, freedom, which is driven, right? Because freedom is just an outcome. It is the result. But what creates that freedom at its essence, the heart of it, is love. Love is the driving energy that gives us a sense of freedom. And within love, the unconditional love is what gives us that sense of freedom. And for love to be unconditional, it has to be free of judgment. Because isn't that what love does to us? When we are burdened with what we are supposed to be, what we need to be, and what we are not, all of this, it is love accepts and consumes us, seeing beyond all of that. That's why feeling loved gives us a sense of freedom. So when we begin to, even in relationships, right? When we begin to ask the other person to be a certain way for us, when we are demanding the other person to behave a certain way for us to be okay in a relationship, we are simultaneously enslaving us to that need. Because we're judging that person for not being what we want them to be. And when we feel that from our partners in relationships, or even in friendships, when we feel judged, when we feel that we are not accepted unless we meet a certain condition, the relationship becomes a burden. And it no longer it falls out of alignment from love, at least from unconditional love. So just by identifying any conclusive need to make things conclusive, we begin to stay more constant in the state of unconditional love. And what more powerful than to have unconditional love for ourselves? But when we talk about that, When we talk about loving ourselves, when we talk about giving ourselves unconditional love, we don't really know how to do it. We don't really know what that really looks like. And here's the thing. The key to freedom is to be free of judgment. At least, I'll tell you, that will remove a lot of chains and shackles around within us. Because when we stop judging the supposed to, the should and need and have to, all disappears. It begins to accept all things as part of the necessity of life, right? When we make a mistake, when we judge it, we go, oh, I made a mistake is bad. But yet sometimes a mistake is the very thing that springboards us into epiphanies and enlightenment. It is true that we learn from mistakes, but we don't call it that when we make a mistake, right? We judge it first. So when we make a mistake, we go, that was a lesson I needed to learn. That's free of judgment. And immediately that so-called mistake becomes a learning element, an important teaching tool. When we say we have a problem, we're judging it as a negative issue, right? Problem is a negative already. It's conclusive. But when we say we have some challenges right now, then we are setting free from the judgment that it's a problem, and it opens the potential just by changing the verbiage. So even though words from a divine perspective is a very limited tool of communication, it still holds power when we utter it. And so how we release judgment is by simply beginning to identify anything that is conclusive and changing it into something that keeps the possibility open. And I gave a very simple example just now. But by simply releasing any sense of, I have to be doing this, I have to be this way, I need to, I'm supposed to, which is all based off of judgment, we begin to open our own possibilities. And that's freedom, right? So, just by creating a mantra such as, I am open to anything and attached to nothing, judgment does not exist in that statement. Unconditional love exists in that statement. And it begins to change everything from it. So I definitely would say that it is not it is definitely not an overstatement to say that releasing judgment is the key to freedom. And I'd love for you guys to try this, because the more I released from my own vocabulary of what I identified as something conclusive, and I begin to bestow that possibility, the infinite possibility, the more I feel free, and the more I feel love, easy, flowing love. And how much of our suffering, struggles come from judgment. Because if you think about our fear of failure, right? Our guilt, the things that binds us, it all comes from judgment. I remember a passage in the Bible, judge not lest you be judged. And, it was, of course, it's taught like as if, judging is wrong. And when we judge, we're going to be judged by God, or we're going to be judged. Like, we kind of look at it as sort of an association to punishment almost. And I realize now that those words really are saying that when we judge, we simultaneously place the same judgment on ourselves. When we judge, we bind somebody or something to that definition that we gave that judgment to, and immediately creates another shackle or chain within ourselves. Because that's a belief. Whatever we judge something to be comes from some kind of belief. Because remember this, even when you believe something is right, and even if 99% of the world agrees with you that that's right, from a universal standpoint, it's still a unique belief system. It doesn't make it right for every single person. So even what's right is still just a belief system. Because in the bigger scheme of things, some of the greatest thing came out of wrong. Some of the greatest things, wisdom and learning and catalyst, came from mistakes. When we talk about war, and when we talk about things directly like killing people or things like that, and we say, well, it's wrong. Well, yes. But then again, isn't it true that we justify a lot of things in different ways? War is a justified murder. We give the soldiers the permission to kill. So then, in that perspective, it's not murder. And then there are those that say, well, war is wrong. And yet, isn't it true that sometimes it is the very wrong thing, like war, that is the only way for someone to realize something? So then if a good can come out of the wrong, then the wrong isn't really wrong. And by being a step ahead and removing the judgment of something being wrong, we immediately invite the possibility of something great coming in from the very wrong that we may have judged it to be. We can always have the preference, right? We may prefer peace. We may prefer not to kill. And that's okay. By just simply being in the space of love, it will naturally be less killing or less murder, crime, whatever, without needing to call it right or wrong. We just simply won't desire to go in that direction. So judgment isn't necessarily at all necessary in order for something to be right or wrong. Living a spiritual life or good life doesn't come from something being wrong. It comes from just wanting to be in a certain state. We just want peace. We just want love. And we just want wellness. And with that desire and that drive, creating that trajectory, we begin to naturally not desire things that are called wrong. But if we end up doing something that would be easily judgeable or labeled as something wrong or mistake or failure, by not having that judgment, we immediately can draw that great potential that can come out of it. So keep that in mind, and I start to identify things that are conclusive in your definitions. And remind yourself to release that and replace expressions that are conclusive with something that leaves more option for possibilities, or be more solution oriented. But whatever you do, when you identify the energy of judgment, you'll also see that the very thing that was limiting you, enslaving you, constricting you, and ultimately robbing you of your freedom. I hope this added some value to you. I hope you resonated with it. Of course, it is always something that I'm sharing from my observation and what I feel inspired with. It is never at all insisted as a universal truth of any type. And I always welcome any kind of comment or even questions that are challenging this very thing, because I want to simply expand more than what I'm actually even understanding now. So please feel free to comment. If you can subscribe to my channel, click like to these episodes. It certainly helps these videos to be more and more available and accessible to others as well. And I appreciate you guys all supporting me. If you like a personal reading, of course, or counsel, please contact me, and my information is all included in the description box below as well. As always, thank you for your time and listening. Everything I say comes from the heart. Thank you.